Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second Catullan conversation. Today, to join me in talking about two passeres in the hand are better than one in the bush is the inimitable Dr. Amy Pistone. Can you introduce yourself for our guests or for our audience?
Absolutely. So I am an assistant professor at Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington. And I usually work on Greek stuff. So I'm excited to be talking about some Latin poetry.
So without any further ado, we might give you a hint here with our two images as to the range of the conversation to come. Just as a note, if there are small children who shouldn't be exposed to non-euphemistic speech, you might want to leave the room.
For people who thought Catullus was young child appropriate, yeah.
Amy, why don't you get us started here?
Yeah, so poem 2A, Sparrow, precious darling of my sweetheart, always her plaything, held fast in her bosom, whom she loves to provoke with outstretched finger, tempting the little pecker to nip harder, when my incandescent longing fancies, just a smidgen of fun and games and comfort for the pain she's feeling. I believe it. Something to lighten that too heavy ardor. How I wish I could sport with you as she does, bring some relief to the spirit's black depression.
Marvelous, marvelous. So if we remind ourselves of that opening image here, the AntiCatullus, where we have a simple Latin story about a girl and her pet, let's just cover that level of this right now. So how about you just summarize the innocence of this pet poem?
So clearly this simple poem is simply about a girl, his sweetheart, who has this pet sparrow. And we should note, sometimes people want to quibble about whether, people think it's a rock thrush or something, but it's become so, this idea of my mistress's sparrow is dead and my mistress's sparrow, this has become as a sparrow. So, but this pet, and she's playing with it and she loves it so much. And, it's just the light of her life, and she gives it all of the attention. And Catullus is a little bit jealous of this pet that is getting all of presumably Lesbia's attention, as opposed to her giving him all of the attention. And that's the only possible way to read this poem.
It absolutely is. In the same way, this is only a rooster, and there is no ambiguity about what the cock might actually be here in my hand.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think this is really exciting. One of the things that a student of mine brought up after I was talking about 51 is this triangulation that we have here. So if we're thinking kind of on that surface level of jealousy, like with 51, Catullus is looking at a woman with another object that's taking her attention. Like in 51, he's looking at Lesbia talking to this man who's like a god. And here we have Catullus kind of in the back looking at the sparrow playing with Lesbia. And there's this really kind of neat investigation, I think, of jealousy from an interesting point of view when you take this kind of innocent reading.
Right. Though I would say that the translation here really leans into, with talking about the little pecker, certainly leans into the possibility that we might read the Passero, we might read the sparrow as something else besides just a bird.
And most certainly we might do that. And so let's put forth a few of the possibilities that exist here if the Passero is not just an innocent bird.
So the other major reading that is out there is the idea that this Passero, and this is picking up on, we'll look at this in a minute, but there's a poem of Martial, and then Passero is the modern Italian version of Passero, that being slang for a penis. And so this poem takes on a very different note if instead of a bird, where we have this like very childlike, this young girl who is playing with a bird and it's sweet and pure, that instead that she is holding fast in her bosom, and tempting the little pecker. If we read this as being a euphemism for a penis, this poem takes on a very different tone.
Indeed. And even if you just looking at this first line, we have like this idea being the delicii, this precious darling of my sweetheart, my girlfriend. So we have a lot of erotically charged language just right there in that first line. And then Sinu, like our friend here, Green, translates it as bosom, but it's often a part of the lower anatomy as well, like here.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I think can refer to any sort of fold or a pocket or a hollow space. And so we can see how this might be much more kind of explicit sexually, that that she likes to hold the little sparrow in this could be a very genital kind of discussion that we're having here.
And I think it continues to get even more so, where you have this kind of very interesting language of she loves to provoke with outstretched finger, but in the Latin, this primum and then digitum dare, literally to like give the first finger kind of, or the primary finger to be nibbled at. So there's something quite provocative here in terms of if this is some kind of, if it's a penis, if the penis is being poked at, or I think maybe more likely if you're inserting the penis into something, or there's I think you might also think of the Passero being the clitoris in a way, and maybe she's masturbating, and that's what Catullus is watching.
And if we do think about it, and that then all of these things about my incandescent longing, and the pain that she's feeling, we could absolutely think about some of the other euphemisms for things. An orgasm in French is a little death, right? So we have a lot of these similar euphemisms that get picked up in different languages to talk about a whole range of sexual vocabulary. So, there's to play, to sport, to these games, right? That those all being different variations of talking about some kind of sexual activity.
Yeah, and I think we can't underscore enough that almost programmatic word of ludera. We have it in the second line, and then we have the parallel composition here of it in the penultimate line in the same metrical location. Ludo, right? Ludic has to do with games. It's a word he's going to use in 50 when he's talking about staying up all night with erotically charged poetics. When a poet, right, especially a Latin poet, says, here's a game, I think the worst thing you can do is play that game by like the rules that it's saying exist.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about like a programmatic, like this kind of invites us to read in a little bit more to the language here, because if this is a game, then like what is the game? What is the challenge? It invites us to approach this as some sort of a puzzle or some kind of a a joke or a something that needs to maybe be explored a little bit more thoroughly.
Yeah, and I think I guess I haven't really asked you what your thought is on the organization of Catullus's poems, but 2 follows hard on 1, where Catullus has just said, I took a lot of care with this work. It's expolitu, like it's like polished to a degree. And then if his very next poem is, oh yeah, my girlfriend has a bird, like that just seems to be deliberately smashing your head against a wall.
Yeah, and so I think, this is something that we've talked about in my class, that we're looking at poems that we know are we can read something into the arrangement, as opposed to something like Sappho, where the order of poems that we have is a little bit jumbled and chaotic and fragmentary. But here, we can read it. So reading something that's very polished. He's been working it over with his hand, and now she's playing with the Passero with her hand again. I think that we're meant to read some kind of euphemisms, or we are invited to read some kind of euphemisms. It's certainly available, and I think Catullus is kind of winking at it, like he kind of wants us to at least consider that there's maybe another meaning here.
uh, one of my go-to moves with Catullus is to run the metapoetic and the erotic with it. And so as you're talking here, I'm struck immediately by the idea of a stylus like pressing into wax, its own kind of like language, right? If you think you have, oh, you have a finger and a substance, and you're kind of like putting the two together. It's a form of like biting, but then a stylus also bites into a surface that it does, and so.
Well, and I think especially, I mean, if we want to use the English, if something is biting, right, it's very cutting, it's acerbic, it's critical. And that's in so many of Catullus's poems as well. We get this idea of like, he's insulting people all the time, and he's inviting us to remember that these insults are just poetry, or are they just poetry, right? There's kind of this constant blending between poem 16 is about like, how dumb do you have to be to think that what I say in my poem is actually real life. And so I think he's constantly navigating this boundary between the poetic persona, but then, you know, reading metaphors, reading euphemisms, reading innuendo, but then also kind of teasing us and telling us like, don't read too much into it unless maybe you should. And so I think kind of that constant push and pull is there all the time of, yeah, the metapoetic, the erotic, the invective are all constantly there.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's also like, as soon as you start getting enough evidence to run one kind of complete allegory, he breaks it off. And then you like have to run another one. Like we're not reading Catullus here like to find the hidden meaning of Catullus. I think it's like all of the polyvalence that's under there. Like it's not, oh, I'm surface Catullus and now I'm getting away with something. It's how many things are there that are beneath this surface.
And I mean, just thinking about, you know, when you get to some of the long poems, like Catullus 64, there's so many allusions to things that are just what do we include? What do we exclude? What allusions do we make? Why is Prometheus at a wedding? That, you know, and I think it's this very kind of Callimacheian, Hellenistic that becomes kind of neo-terror, this aesthetic of, I want there to be lots of Easter eggs and rabbit holes and paths for you to go down. And I think that's such a part of the kind of poetic style of Catullus, that there's a lot of things, and there isn't one that's right and one that's wrong. There are a lot of kind of paths to go down, or, you know, rocks to lift up and see what's underneath them. And I think that's very much part of how he constructs so many of his poems.
And in a way, I think like that fits with these last two lines, because I always love when Catullus is like, I'm so miserable, but I always kind of say, you're not too miserable not to write. Like the greatest statement of his misery that Catullus could make is to leave a poem blank. But by processing, by writing, I think, you know, he's taking care, he's relieving, to use the translation here, the spirit's black depression. Like this is a fun poem to write. It's a fun poem to read. It loops back on itself. Like it's a form of distraction.
And then if we come back around to this idea of like, oh no, it's so sad, he's so like, lesbian broke his heart again, whatever. Like, I mean, does he have anything to write about if not for that, you know, real or poetically created sadness? But like whatever, you know, these things that he's complaining about, they're also fueling this creative output. And so in a way, like how bad is it really? Because I mean, I bring up like Taylor Swift a lot as like, you know, like, oh no, I had a breakup and I wrote another best-selling album about it. Like, it's not that bad. I mean, I'm sure it was sad to go through a breakup, but how bad is it really when it's creating really popular, successful art? Also, it's kind of fueling and giving you material to work with there.
I mean, I will never shy away from making the comparison to any kind of modern pop music. Like Teardrops on My Guitar is very Catullan sentiment of like, and Augustan Elegist, you see my papyrus is wet with my tears.
Absolutely.
So one thing to mention here, because of the Hellenistic idea that you brought up, and because last week our conversation was about Catullus and Sappho, the Sparrows have a possible, very, very likely connection to Sappho 1, where Aphrodite's chariot is drawn by quick sparrows. Sappho 1 is all about like a wish, a fulfillment for having a partner. The way in which Catullus 2a ends is also with a wish. And so I think there's a lot, if you're looking for it, and this is always the nice thing, you can find the connections, but I think this is part of that Sparrow influence there.
And I think we're always invited to see kind of sapphic intertexts there, because we have poem 51 to, like, we know Catullus is thinking, if lesbia is an allusion to Sappho, like, we have plenty of reasons to draw specifically. Like, it doesn't, I think sometimes we make things that could be a bit of a stretch when we're looking at connections between different works by different authors. But I think in the case of Sappho, we're really invited to, because Catullus, in the same way that he uses words like ludere, and he's inviting you to read this as a riddle, as a poem that's got stuff going on in it, as innuendos, whatever. And I think with Sappho, like, we're always justified in seeing, like, this is there something with Sappho going on here? And so yeah, this idea of Sparrow being, it's an animal that's associated with Aphrodite, and so it's a pet, it's a beloved pet, but it's also, it's something that has to do with love and with sex. And so I think that in fact supports both readings of Passero as an actual, like, Aphrodite is presumably flying an actual chariot with actual sparrows, not a penis drawn chariot, though who knows. But I think we're meant to think of this as being actual birds. But at the same time, as soon as we're so clearly in the realm of Aphrodite, sex is just right there. And so I think actually the thinking about this ode to Aphrodite supports both readings of what the Passero might be.
I think that was incredibly well said. As a result of your mentioning of presumably the sparrows being real birds, I did want to draw on a tiny piece of material culture here from Pompeii, the fascinus, plural fascini. There's penises all over in the Roman Empire. Like, one of the reasons why it's almost invited to ask this question of, is Passero a penis, is just because penises were not hidden away like they are in a contemporary American society. Like, you would have wind chime penises where you see, here we have a penis bird, there's its wings and its talons, it's holding two other penises. So it's like, we're not saying, oh, you have to really dig deep to find the scurrilous imagination of the Roman. It's like, no, it's on the street.
It's right there. And the fact that we have a flying, right, this fascinus, like, is a flying phallus, a flying penis, like, really, again, kind of blurs the line. Like, this is, the fact that Passero can be a euphemism for penis, and we have flying penises, and we, like, this is very much, both readings are extremely supported by other references, material culture, like, both, reading both of these, I think, are extremely supported.
So before we move on to the next poem, to summarize some of our discussion here about 2A, the Passero as the kind of a surface reading. Oh, my girlfriend has a sparrow and I'm jealous of the attention that my girlfriend gives to the sparrow. Kind of below that, though, we have Passero taken either, like, more euphemistically as a penis, maybe as clitoris. So then we have entered the realm of, like, masturbation, and even the act of writing is kind of like self-masturbatory in some interesting ways. But Catullus follows this poem up with a threnody or a dirge, because, we'll come to that in a second. Our poor bird has perished. Mourn, Cupids all, every Venus, and whatever company still exists of caring people. Sparrow lies dead. My own true sweetheart, Sparrow, the pet and darling of my sweetheart, loved by her more than she valued her own eyesight. Sweet as honey he was, and knew his mistress no less closely than a mother her child. Nope, than a child her mother. Nor, from her warm lap's safety, would he ever venture far, but, hopping this way and that way, come back cheeping always to his lady. Now he's traveling on that dark shroud journey, whence they tell us none of the departed ever returns. The hell with you, you evil blackness of hell, devouring all that's lovely. Such a beautiful sparrow you've torn from me. Oh, wicked deed. Oh, wretched little sparrow. It's your fault that now my sweetheart's eyelids are sore and swollen red from all of her weeping.
Beautiful.
So here we enter a striking juxtaposition with the shortness and the kind of playful, jealous energy of the first one. First of all, Amy, how do you take the tone of this? Obviously, like, I have felt a certain way because of the way I perform this poem, but
I tend to, I mean, I love the way you performed it because it's very much the way that I also read. Like it's so over the top, right? This is the kind of language that one would use for a real person, not for like, I mean, it's sad that her bird died, but to be fair, he was literally just wishing that her bird would stop stealing all the attention. So if we are reading this as a bird, it's, you know, it's a little bit over the top. And I think, again, I mean, I think that this makes me think that he's kind of winking at the whole thing, right? He knows this is the black darkness of hell. This is a little much for a bird, and so and a bird that he didn't like in the first place. So I think this is either right. If I mean, again, going with the bird reading, he's just kind of hamming it up with this whole bird thing, or he's being extremely dramatic about, well, I mean, regardless, he's being extremely dramatic. Whatever we think he's talking about here, it's definitely kind of very over the top and kind of a drama queen take here.
I hadn't really had this thought until the way you worded that, to run a conspiratorial idea here. Like, Catullus seems really guilty. So Catullus like kills the bird then in this proposal I'm making. And then in order to like shy away, he's like, the bird is dead. Somehow the bird died. But he's like, I see.
Oh, I loved this bird so much. Who could have done this? Yeah, he's deflecting attention from his.
It's like somebody ate the cake and it's like, where did the cake go? And they're brushing it off of your chin.
Now I've become a Catullus killed the sparrow kind of truther here.
So let's maybe point out some things here right away. This really kind of amazing opening. Lugata, this like cry, weep, mourn, a word that's charged with like cultural ramifications of like the rules around mourning and various things. Because it's not just like weep, it is very much kind of like do this formalized action, community action even, because it's like summoning the all the Venuses, all the Cupids, and like as many men as there are among those who know what Venustustas is.
Yeah, I think like it is very right. Like it's, I mean, it's sort of calling for like we need to have a big funeral. We all need to mourn. This is which I mean I get, and I think honestly, I mean I know whether Catullus is writing like elegy proper, he's not often writing in elegiac couplets, but or sometimes he is, but that we have this that we're kind of looking back to, if we think of him as like proto-elegy or sort of in the elegy range, like something that is looking back to legitimate mourning and legitimate, like, and looking forward to what elegy will become later. It's this thing that used to be an actual lament and actual grief, and it gets taken up by Roman authors to be this very like, oh no, my girlfriend doesn't love me. Wait, she does. Nope, just kidding. She still won't let me in, right? Like it becomes this almost kind of a parody of legit, like that we're blowing up these highs and lows of relationships into this like, oh, the world is ending. Let's have a funeral. Let's lament. Like commute. Like it raises. It either brings down the register of legitimate mourning, or it raises these angsty love poems up into a more serious register. But it's playing with the societal import of this kind of sadness.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely something there about like humor and excess. Like this poem is so excessive from the start. Like you have cupidinesque, this quintisyllabic word, followed by venustiorum, another quintisyllabic word. And then when we hit death, tenebricosum, like these are weird words to end on. Like a hendecasyllable is 11 syllables long, and half of your line is basically.
Yeah, now I can't get the idea out of my head that he's like playing up his grief because he's. I mean, I do in the past before I was convinced that Catullus killed the sparrow. I think there is a sense that like from poem 2, he doesn't like this bird, and so that maybe he's feeling a little guilty about. He was wishing ill on this bird, and now the bird is dead, and that he maybe needs to like. In some way kind of make up for the fact that this was absolutely what he wanted, whether or not he was actively involved in this death.
Yeah, and in a way, like then you have that ironic pairing because it's a tiny little bird, but it gets a kind of big poem of mourning and lament. Yeah, so I also see here a little bit with this, so what Green translates as caring, venustiorum, but venustas is this like ability to like have good taste, like refinement almost. And it's like, you're invited to this funeral if you know what I'm up to. Like if you get my jokes, you can come to this funeral. And I recently learned, well, if you take like high school Latin and maybe at college, people love to throw funerals for the bird. Like it's a classroom activity that people do. So you can find all these pictures online.
Of people having an actual.
Yeah,
that is delightful.
Yeah, it's absolutely charming to see.
Well, I mean, just that is so, again, keeping with, like, we've talked about the first 3 poems here, but it's so in keeping with this, like, these poems are super clever. You need to be really clever to get them. I'm playing games with you. That ludic quality, right? That the poet and the reader are engaged in this kind of, not a battle of wits per se, but there's like a kind of teasing rapport between the two, or playful rapport between the two. And so, yeah, like, if you're among those people who get it, who are classy enough and smart enough for my poems, then you can come to this funeral, maybe with a big old wink after, like you can come to the funeral.
Yeah, and so then he actually quotes the first line from the previous poem in a really interesting way, particularly because in antiquity, often poems would be known by their first line. I'm not really sure if that extends to like 40 elegies that you might write, 40 decasyllables. But certainly there's something going on here with the combination of eyes and the Passero. I see in this elements of reading, but that's because I see elements of reading in everything that I do with Catullus. But kind of like invited to, because we have that repetition of eyes, both at the beginning and the ending. And it seems to be like one problem of this dead bird. If we think about it as a real dead bird, a major problem is Lesbia is now distracted. Her eyes are swollen, so she can't read Catullus's great poems that he's sending to her to seduce her. And she's distracted, so he can't like replace the first dead Passero with his euphemistic Passero.
Well, and what I always read in this poem, especially, like, he's not that upset about her being sad. I don't see a lot of legitimate upset about, like, it's not empathy. It's like, among other things, like, she's not hot anymore, right? She's like, her eyes are, she's made herself unattractive with her crying. She's ugly crying about this stupid sparrow. And now it's even worse. I wish she would go back to not paying attention to me, because at least I could look at her and she was pretty then. Now she's made herself ugly with this. Her eyes are sore and swollen. This is even worse.
Yeah, that is such a good reading about like the male gaze of Catullus, where like even like with 51, he likes looking at Lesbia. Yeah, I hadn't clocked that. Like the problem here, one of the problems here Catullus is having is like how unpleasant she is to look at, which makes me think that maybe some of these really long words are sound ugly and jangly, and so he's like imitating in his poem. He's like, look, I'm gonna write this ugly poem to go with.
Yeah, which especially for some, that like I feel like the like Lugateo Veneris Cupidinisque, like that part I don't think is so ugly. But I mean, yeah, we start like there are a lot of these words that I think maybe are a little bit discordant or a little kind of cacophonous. So I far from an expert on which sounds Romans think are pretty and not pretty. But yeah, I wonder if some of these words that are like, if there is something going on there with his word choice, aside from just trying to like be very puffed up and, you know, this kind of overdone language.
I mean, I was like, even like instinctively, like something like modo, like this is very prosaic, almost like first here, now there, repetition of it, and then in iter, like it doesn't run. So let's talk for a second here about the anti-catabasis. So catabasis is when you go to the underworld and you come back, and now Catullus is like, this bird is not coming back.
Yeah, this is not a hero. This is not Aeneas. This is not right. He's not having any of those heroic things where we go to the underworld and we come back out and it's glorious, right? This bird is dead. It is real dead.
And in fact, it's like, you know, one of the things that they tell us from the Odyssey, etc., is a hero does come back. So this idea of, oh, they tell us, is just like, I mean, it's probably like Epicureans that he, like they're entering the realm of philosophy here about what's going to happen with your soul. But in terms of like literary precedent, there's all sorts of things for your soul's coming back, or for your bodies returning. So fantastic. I just want to cover quickly one of the reasons why people point to Passero as being read in this euphemistic way from antiquity is from Martial 11:6. And this is where you get another theory around Catullus. So Martial, at the end of this poem, on the occasion of a Saturnalia, is quoting Catullus here about give me now kisses, right? So the Catullan kisses. So Martial is steeped in Catullus. And then he says, if they shall be as many as he said, I will give you Catullus's Sparrow, this passerem Catulli. So this kind of has two responses. If you give me these kisses, I will anally penetrate you as a like with my Passer Catulli. Or people like to say it's a book of poems that was called the Passer poems.
I feel like it's definitely talking about the penis, and but sure, maybe it's a book of poems.
Yeah. So I wanted to get your thoughts, Amy, in general, on the idea of innuendo and the function of innuendo in literature, especially like ancient literature and society.
So, well, I have as it for people who are fans of The Office or the comic, their cartoon Archer, right? This like phrasing, or that's what she's right there. We still very much love a good double entendre kind of innuendo thing where both it's funny, and as I point out all the time in my classes, like ancient people like modern people think penises are funny, and things that are inadvertently sound like they're sexual is funny. And so, but I think there's a couple elements if we want to like take all the fun out of it by intellectualizing innuendo. I think that there's a way that having like wordplay, going back to this, like the Venustior, right? The caring people, or the clever people, the people with taste. So this is going to be a slight digression, but there's an article that I love that talks about old comedy and how everybody would leave there feeling kind of smart, because like there's different layers of jokes and everyone's getting different ones, and there's going to be some jokes that no one around you is giggling, but you're giggling because you got that joke and other people didn't. And so you not only get the enjoyment of laughing at things, but you get the enjoyment of feeling like, you know, you and those four other people who giggled at that joke, you're very clever, you got that one, whereas not everybody did. And so you get that kind of smug satisfaction plus the actual comedy on its own. And I think innuendo does that. It lets you feel like you're clever for getting the wordplay, getting the joke, getting the innuendo. But I also think that there's kind of that reaction, and Martial has a poem where he talks about this, like he loves that people are blushing, and like he's scandalizing people with his poems, and these poems are in everybody's pockets, and they're just so scandalous. And I think innuendo sometimes can be almost like when you're like, oh my God, is that talking about a penis? Oh, that's so like that's so explicit. And that kind of that moment of shock, I think, is something, especially for the kinds of poems that Catullus, many of Catullus's poems, I think are they're going for insults or they're going for sexual content, they're erotic. And I think there's kind of that moment of to say like, man, I sure wish I could have sex with lesbia, but she won't let me or whatever, right? That's as opposed to this elaborate thing that's about this bird and it's hopping back and forth and back and forth. And then you go, oh my God, that's a penis. Oh no. Like I think innuendo functions is as being a kind of heightening the shock or the scandal that comes along with some of these very sexually charged poems.
You have me now rethinking this line 9, which comes 3 lines after line 6. For classic.
Yeah, is that
No, I was just nice. But I'm thinking about this, like the back and forth and cucumciliens. We didn't really talk about like the pasta being a tongue, but there's almost something a bit kind of lingual at this moment, or fellatio, like, you know, because tongues and genitals, either way. Because like, we didn't
see. I would have said I see that more as being masturbatory.
Okay.
Like as like female masturbatory, but I think you're absolutely right with kind of, yeah. I mean, I think both of them have that kind of a circular motion. Could definitely be alluding to either of those.
Yeah, I know that little like Pipiabat. So one mentioned, just because I should be fair, we didn't talk about this poem has been read as erectile dysfunction. And so one of the, if we read 2 as Catullus's penis, then 3 is mourning his inability to get it up. One of the thoughts that I have about innuendo, that kind of relates to people that refuse to read this poem this way, is like, where does it get you? Right? Like, I think you and I have just proven that you can get somewhere really interesting by exploring innuendo rather than stopping and being like, oh, it's a penis. You still need to say what that means and what that kind of like cultural interpretive work happens as a result of that conversation. And I think that we really nicely covered that.
Well, I mean, getting the like, right, the what is it like? Now this is a man who's written an elaborate poem that is a funeral dirge for his penis. Like, that's funny.
Yep.
Like, that's really funny. I mean, all of the stuff that was a little over the top when it was about a bird that he hated. Now he's like writing a funeral dirge for his penis. Like, I think that adds another level of humor here when we're thinking about, like, it's already overdone. It's already kind of comically hyperbolic in the first place. But then if we want to think about this as being a man, like that his penis, his erection has gone to hell forever, and his girlfriend is sad because, like, she's crying because he can't get it up anymore. Like, that's a whole different poem. And the fact that we can read it on both levels, like, I think is both clever and just it's funny.
Absolutely. And the more ways that you can accrete meaning that then kind of spread out. So I think we've done a really nice job here of exploring many of the levels. A quick delight from Twitter. Ligonium has beautifully given us the Lego version of the death of, not a parrot. Ovid has a dead parrot if you want a dead parrot, but I guess this is the Lego version to have. And just here at Livia's garden fresco, you can see evidence of a bird cage. So this is the evidence. You use this picture if you want to say the Passero is a Passero. And then just finally, just so it's on the video, here is if you want to follow a very strenuous series of arguments back and forth on what people in the 80s thought the Sparrow was and why it was not that way. These 3 men all are able to speak around the point. So Amy, I want to thank you for coming on to Catullan Conversations today. And
thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
And for the rest of you, we'll see you at the next conversation.